My name is Erica, I'm 47 years old, and I need to tell you what really happened, because everyone's got it twisted. You hear about a husband who cheated with some 26-year-old, and automatically assume he's the bad guy, right? Well, buckle up, because this whole mess is way more complicated than anyone wants to admit. I was married to Michael for 14 years. 14 freaking years, and yeah, the first few were actually pretty good. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. We had our little routines, our inside jokes, our weekend plans. He'd bring me coffee and bed on Sundays, and I'd curl up next to him while we watched whatever mindless show was on. Life was simple and comfortable, and I honestly thought that's how it would always be. Then I got pregnant at 42. Let me tell you something about having a baby when you're over 40. It's not like these young moms who bounce back in 6 weeks and post gym selfies. My body was destroyed. I'm talking about everything you can imagine, and some things you probably can't. The doctors kept saying it was normal, that recovery takes time, especially at my age. But nobody prepared me for how long that time would actually be. Our daughter, Chloe, became my whole world. I mean, she had to be. I was the one getting up every 2 hours, dealing with the crying, the feeding, the constant worry that I was doing everything wrong. Michael would help when he could, but he still had to go to work every day while I was stuck at home, trying to figure out how to be a mom when I felt like I was barely keeping myself together. The postpartum depression hit me like a truck. Everything felt overwhelming and impossible. Simple things like taking a shower or making dinner became these huge tasks that I'd put off for days. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the person staring back at me. My hair was always a mess, I was wearing the same clothes for days, and I felt like I was failing at everything. Michael kept trying to be supportive. I'll give him that. He'd tell me I looked beautiful when I clearly looked like hell. He'd suggest date nights or weekend getaways like I could just leave our baby and pretend everything was normal. He didn't get that I couldn't just turn off being a mom. When you're breastfeeding and sleep-deprived and your hormones are completely out of whack, the last thing you want is someone telling you that you need to get back to normal. And the intimacy thing? Forget about it. I know everyone acts like sex is this important part of marriage, but when you're dealing with postpartum recovery, a crying baby, and feeling like your body isn't even yours anymore, physical intimacy feels impossible. It's not that I didn't love Michael or find him attractive, it's that I felt like I was drowning and he was asking me to dance. Every time he'd try to initiate something, or even just touch me in that way, it felt like pressure, like another demand on my already overwhelmed system. I needed space to heal, to figure out who I was as a mother, to get my body back to some version of normal, but he kept pushing, kept trying, kept making these little comments about how we needed to reconnect as a couple. I tried to explain it to him so many times. I'd sit him down and talk about how hard everything was, how exhausted I felt, how I needed him to be patient with me. He'd nod and say he understood, but then, a few weeks later, we'd have the same conversation again. It was like he heard me, but he didn't really get it. The worst part was feeling like I had to defend my own recovery process, like I was supposed to just snap back to being the wife I was before Chloe was born. But that woman didn't exist anymore. I was a mother now, and that changed everything about who I was and what I needed. I thought he'd understand that, but instead, he seemed to resent it. I remember one night when Chloe was about 8 months old. I was finally feeling a little more like myself. We'd gone out to dinner, our first real date in months, and I was actually enjoying myself. But then on the way home, Michael started talking about how nice it was to have the old Erica back and how he'd missed me. It made me so angry because it felt like he was saying the mother version of me wasn't good enough. That's when I realized we had completely different ideas about what our marriage should look like now. He wanted everything to go back to the way it was before, and I needed him to accept that things had changed forever. I wasn't trying to punish him or push him away. I was just trying to survive this massive life change while still being a good mom to our daughter. But somehow in his mind, my struggle became about him. My need for space became rejection. My focus on our baby became neglect of our marriage. It was like he couldn't see past his own needs to understand what I was going through, and that's when everything started to fall apart, though I didn't realize it at the time. Looking back now, I can see that we were both struggling, but I was dealing with the physical and emotional aftermath of childbirth, on top of learning how to be a mother, while he was dealing with feeling like he'd lost his wife. The problem was, neither of us knew how to bridge that gap, and instead of working together to figure it out, we just started drifting apart, each of us feeling misunderstood and unappreciated. 5 years. 5 whole years I spent trying to get my life back together after Chloe was born, and let me tell you, nobody talks about how long that actually takes. Everyone acts like postpartum depression just goes away after a few months, but for some of us, it's a much longer journey. I was seeing therapists, trying different medications, doing everything I could to feel normal again. During those years, Michael kept trying to fix our marriage. He'd plan surprise date nights that I'd have to cancel because I was exhausted or Chloe was sick. He'd book weekend getaways without asking if I was ready to leave our daughter overnight. He'd suggest couples therapy, like our problems were something we could just talk through in an hour session once a week. What he didn't understand was that I wasn't ready for any of that. I was still figuring out how to be a functioning human being, let alone a wife. Some days, it took everything I had just to get through the basic responsibilities of taking care of Chloe and keeping our house from falling apart. Adding the pressure of working on our relationship felt impossible. I kept telling him I needed more time, that I was doing the best I could, that rushing me wasn't helping anyone. But he'd get frustrated and say things like, "It's been 3 years," or "Other couples figure this out faster." Like there was some timeline I was supposed to follow that I was failing to meet. The truth is, I felt guilty all the time. Guilty that I wasn't the wife he wanted, guilty that I couldn't just snap out of whatever was wrong with me, guilty that our marriage was struggling. But I also felt angry that he couldn't see how hard I was trying. I was taking care of our daughter, managing our household, dealing with my own mental health issues, and trying to be present for him too. But it never felt like enough. The intimacy issue became this huge elephant in the room. It wasn't that I never wanted to be close to him, but the physical side of our relationship felt complicated and stressful. My body had changed, my hormones were still messed up, and honestly, at the end of most days, I was too tired to think about anything beyond getting Chloe settled and maybe watching an episode of something mindless on TV. Michael started making these little comments about other couples we knew, how they seemed so happy and connected. He'd point out marriages where the wives seemed more present or engaged. It felt like he was constantly comparing me to other women who had somehow managed to balance motherhood and marriage better than I was managing to do. I remember this one particular night when we'd gone to dinner with some friends. The other wife was all over her husband, laughing at his jokes, touching his arm, giving him these adoring looks. On the car ride home, Michael made some comment about how nice it was to see a couple who still acted like they were in love. I knew he was talking about us, about what we weren't anymore. That night I tried to explain to him again how I was feeling, but instead of listening, he got defensive. He said he felt like he was walking on eggshells around me, that he couldn't say or do anything right. He said he missed the woman he married and didn't know how to get her back. That hurt because it felt like he was saying the mother version of me wasn't worth loving. We had this terrible fight where he finally said what I think he'd been thinking for years, that other men wouldn't have waited this long, that he deserved a wife who actually wanted to be married to him. I was so angry and hurt that I said maybe he should go find one of those other men's wives then, since they seemed so much better at this than I was. After that fight, something changed between us. The tension that had been building for years finally came to the surface, and we both stopped pretending that things were going to magically get better. He became more distant, spending longer hours at work and less time at home. I threw myself even more into taking care of Chloe and managing our household, telling myself that at least I was good at being a mom, even if I was failing as a wife. The space between us grew wider every day. We'd have these surface-level conversations about schedules and responsibilities, but we stopped really talking to each other. We stopped laughing together, stopped sharing the little moments that used to make us feel connected. We were like roommates who happened to share a child and a mortgage. I told myself this was just a rough patch, that all marriages go through difficult periods. I convinced myself that once I felt more stable, once Chloe got a little older, once life settled down, we'd be able to work things out. But deep down, I think I knew that something fundamental had shifted between us, and I wasn't sure either of us knew how to shift it back. By the time Chloe turned 5, I was finally starting to feel more like myself again. The overwhelming fog of those early years had lifted, and I could see our situation more clearly. What I saw wasn't pretty. Michael and I were basically strangers living in the same house, going through the motions of being married without any of the actual connection that makes marriage work. That's when I started noticing the changes in him. He was getting up earlier, paying more attention to how he looked before work, staying late at the office more often. He seemed lighter somehow, like he was carrying less of the weight that had been dragging both of us down for years. At first, I was happy about it. I thought maybe he was finally accepting that this was our new normal and finding ways to be content with it. But then I started seeing other signs. He was more protective of his phone, taking calls in the other room, getting texts that made him smile in ways I hadn't seen in years. He started talking about work more, mentioning coworkers I'd never heard of before, describing office dynamics like they were the most interesting thing in the world. I wasn't stupid. I could tell something was different. But instead of being concerned about our marriage, I felt threatened, like someone else was getting the version of Michael that I used to have access to. Someone else was making him laugh and feel valued and appreciated. Someone else was getting his attention and energy while I was still stuck trying to figure out how to be both a good mother and a good wife. The paranoid thoughts started small. Maybe he was just making new friends at work. Maybe he was finally finding some happiness outside of our struggling marriage, which honestly might be good for both of us. But then the thoughts got bigger and scarier. What if he was sharing things with someone else that he used to share with me? What if someone else was giving him the emotional connection that I hadn't been able to provide? I started paying more attention to his behavior, looking for clues about what was really going on. I'd check his phone when he was in the shower, listen to his side of conversations when he thought I wasn't around, ask casual questions about his day that were really attempts to figure out who he was spending time with. That's when I found out about Amanda. She was young, probably the mid-20s, new to his office. The way he talked about her was different from how he talked about other coworkers. There was this energy in his voice, this engagement that I hadn't heard in years. He'd mentioned conversations they'd had, jokes she'd made, problems she was dealing with that he was helping her solve. I felt something twist in my stomach every time her name came up. This woman was getting daily access to my husband's thoughts and attention, while I was lucky if we had one real conversation a week. She was probably seeing him at his best, professional, competent, funny, while I only saw him tired and frustrated at the end of long days. The jealousy was eating me alive, but I couldn't figure out how to address it without sounding crazy. What was I supposed to say? That I was upset he had a female coworker? That I didn't like how he talked about her? That I was worried about some woman I'd never even met? So instead I started making little comments, asking pointed questions about Amanda's role in the office, her qualifications, whether she was married. I'd make jokes about her age or suggest that she probably didn't understand the complexities of balancing work and family life. I was trying to diminish her in small ways, hoping that would somehow protect what was left of my marriage. But Michael defended her every single time. He'd explain how smart she was, how hardworking, how much the office benefited from her perspective. He'd shut down my subtle criticisms with this protective tone that I recognized but hadn't heard directed at me in years. He was standing up for her in ways he hadn't stood up for me during my struggles. That's when I knew I was in trouble. My husband was emotionally connecting with another woman while our marriage was falling apart, and somehow I was supposed to just accept it as normal workplace friendship. But nothing about it felt normal or safe or okay. The breaking point came on a night that should have been about us. We'd actually managed to get a babysitter and go out to dinner, something we hadn't done in months. I was trying to reconnect, asking him about work, showing interest in his life outside our house. But every story came back to Amanda somehow. Amanda had suggested this new approach to a project. Amanda had made this hilarious observation about office politics. Amanda had helped him solve some problem that had been bothering him. By the time we got home, I was furious. I felt like I'd spent the evening on a date with my husband and his work wife. So when we walked in the door, and he made some casual comment about how good it felt to have a dull conversation, I snapped. I told him exactly what I thought about his relationship with Amanda. How inappropriate it was, how disrespectful to our marriage, how obvious it was that he was more invested in her than he was in fixing things with me. I accused him of having an emotional affair, of replacing me with some young woman who didn't have the baggage of actually being married to him. He denied everything, of course. Said I was being paranoid and jealous that Amanda was just a friend, that I was looking for problems where none existed. But I could see the guilt in his eyes. I could hear the defensiveness in his voice. I knew I was right about what was happening, even if he wasn't ready to admit it. That night, I gave him an ultimatum. Either he cut off all non-professional contact with Amanda, or I was done with our marriage. I wasn't going to sit around and watch him fall in love with someone else while pretending everything was fine. He could choose our family, or he could choose whatever fantasy he had going with her, but he couldn't have both. He agreed to my terms, but I could tell he wasn't happy about it. Over the next few weeks, I watched him like a hawk. I checked his phone constantly, monitored his email, asked detailed questions about every minute of his workday. I was determined to make sure he was keeping his promise, but in the process, I turned our house into a prison. The trust between us was completely gone. Every interaction felt loaded with suspicion and resentment. He was angry about my surveillance, and I was angry that I felt like I needed to do it in the first place. We were both miserable, but I convinced myself that this was what it took to save our marriage. What I didn't realize was that my controlling behavior was pushing him right back toward the thing I was trying to prevent. By making our home feel suffocating and hostile, I was making his connection with Amanda seem even more appealing by comparison. I was creating the exact conditions that would make him want to escape, and then acting shocked when he did exactly that. The affair started about 3 months after my ultimatum. I don't know all the details, and honestly, I don't want to. What I know is that Amanda left her job around that time, supposedly for a better opportunity. What I know is that Michael started working late more often, had more business trips, more reasons to be away from home. I found out the way these things usually get discovered, a text message that popped up on his phone while he was in the shower. Just a few words, but they were enough to confirm what I'd been afraid of for months. My husband was sleeping with a 26-year-old coworker, and I was the clueless wife who had somehow missed all the signs. The confrontation was brutal. I had evidence this time, not just suspicions, and I threw it all at him at once. How could he do this to our family? How could he risk everything we'd built for some young woman who didn't even understand what real life was like? How could he make me look like a fool? But instead of the guilt and remorse I expected, Michael fought back. He talked about the years of rejection, the constant criticism, the way I'd made him feel unwanted in his own home. He said Amanda made him feel valued and appreciated in ways I hadn't in years. He said he was tired of apologizing for having normal human needs that I couldn't or wouldn't meet. I wasn't having it. Cheating was cheating, regardless of what problems we had in our marriage. He'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, broken trust that couldn't be repaired. I told him he had destroyed our family for some temporary excitement with a woman who would probably dump him the moment things got difficult. But even as I was screaming at him about betrayal and consequences, part of me knew that this didn't come out of nowhere. The affair was the symptom, not the disease. Our marriage had been dying a slow death for years, and we'd both played a role in killing it. But admitting that felt too dangerous, too much like giving him permission to hurt me this way. So I focused on the affair itself, on the clear moral wrong that I could point to without having to examine my own behavior. I filed for divorce immediately, hired the most aggressive lawyer I could find, and prepared to take him for everything he was worth. He wanted to destroy our family? Fine. But he was going to pay for it. The divorce process became a war zone. I was determined to make him suffer consequences for what he'd done, to make sure everyone knew he was the one who had broken our family apart. I told our friends, our families, anyone who would listen about his affair with a young coworker. I painted myself as the devoted wife and mother who had been betrayed by a selfish husband having a midlife crisis. But the narrative I'd constructed started falling apart when people began telling their own version of our story. Friends came forward with memories of how I'd treated Michael over the years, how I dismissed his needs and pushed him away. Family members started questioning whether I'd done everything I could to save our marriage before it got to this point. His lawyer presented evidence of my controlling behavior, my emotional manipulation, the way I'd used my mental health struggles as a weapon against anyone who questioned my choices. Text messages where I'd threatened divorce over minor disagreements. Recordings of conversations where I'd belittled him in front of our daughter. Documentation of how I'd isolated him from friends and family who didn't support my version of events. Suddenly, I wasn't just the wronged wife anymore. I was the toxic spouse who had driven her husband into the arms of another woman through years of emotional abuse and neglect. The sympathy I'd been receiving turned into judgment. People started looking at me like I was the real problem in our marriage. The custody battle was even worse. Michael's lawyer argued that I was manipulative and unstable, that I'd already shown a willingness to use Chloe as a weapon against her father. They presented evidence of how I'd tried to turn our daughter against him, how I'd made her feel responsible for keeping our family together. Meanwhile, Michael seemed to be thriving. His relationship with Amanda was apparently serious and healthy. He was going to therapy, working on himself, taking responsibility for his role in our marriage's failure, while also setting boundaries about my behavior. He looked happier and more confident than I'd seen him in years. I, on the other hand, was falling apart. The stress of the divorce, the loss of financial security, the realization that I'd have to rebuild my entire life was overwhelming. I was angry and bitter and alone, spending most of my time obsessing over how unfair everything was. The final blow came when I overheard Chloe talking to a friend about how much calmer and happier her dad seemed now. How his new girlfriend was nice to her and didn't make everything about drama and conflict. How she wished I could be happy like that, too. That's when it hit me that I'd lost everything. My marriage, my financial security, my daughter's respect, and my own sense of who I was. And the worst part was, I still couldn't fully accept that I'd played a role in destroying my own life. It was easier to blame Michael's affair, Amanda's youth, the unfairness of a system that didn't understand what I'd been through. But sitting alone in my small apartment, watching my ex-husband build a new life with someone who actually appreciated him, I had to face the truth. I'd been so focused on being right that I'd forgotten how to be happy. I'd been so determined to protect myself from hurt that I'd hurt everyone around me. I'd been so convinced that I was the victim that I'd become the villain in my own story. And somehow, even knowing all of that, I still can't bring myself to fully accept responsibility for what happened. Because admitting that I destroyed my own marriage feels too much like saying the affair was justified, and I'm not ready to go there. So I'm stuck in this place where I know I made mistakes, but I still think everyone else made bigger ones. Maybe that makes me the villain after all, but if it does, at least now you know how I got here. Thanks for listening. Let me know in the comments, was she the villain, or just a broken woman trying her best?